I think, as a student of Hannah Arendt,
Okay.
the relationship between democracy and social justice is complicated.
Okay.
You know, I don't agree with her. The argument she makes on revolution and the argument she makes on school desegregation, I don't agree with her that they're absolutely distinct. So she celebrates the American Revolution because it was not about justice, and sees the problems of the French Revolution because it got caught up in the problems of justice. But I do see a tension between them. So that leads me to wonder about your general idea that the movement for Black Lives is a radical feminist, Black, and I don't know if I have it in the right order, pragmatic movement.
Okay.
So I'm terribly excited about the fact that you put these terms together, because I think it's really rich and illuminating. But then I wonder whether you think that, how you think that's possible. How can you, let me put it this way, how can it be radical and pragmatic at the same time?
Sure, yeah. This was one of the things that I was most afraid to put in the book, because I knew that people would freak out about it, and I was kind of freaked out about it. But, I felt like it was the most accurate rendering of what I was observing, which is to say that, radical in and of itself doesn't have any ideological content, right? Meaning that you can be radical on the right, you can be radical on the left, right? Like you can, and you can be radical in a way that's not easy to characterize in the kind of planes of ideological distribution that we, you can be temperamentally radical, right? And not necessarily.
Yes.
Right. So taking that, right, understanding, right, as like radical, as interested in the radix, right, as interested in and willing to overturn settled understandings, and to get to the root of problems and say that everything's on the table for change, right? The movement just is radical, right? Like it is manifestly radical. That is what it is interested in. It has observed, or people in it have observed that, taking many of the kinds of truisms, both colloquial and philosophical of the 20th century as your baseline will not get you to a place where Black people and other marginalized people can live and thrive. It just can't get you there. So you have to be radical. You have to be willing to unsettle what has been settled. And so that's the one side. But at the same time, the movement is manifestly, right, concerned with people's lives, right? Concerned with saving people's lives. And so it is necessarily pragmatic, right? So it does not have, and it's, it's Black feminist movement, so it's also inductive and works from people's lived experiences. But it doesn't have the orientation towards saying that in the abstract, right? Or ideally, this is how society would be if we woke up in the context of justice, right? Like, because it's so interested in saving people's lives, it has to approach things in the world as it is, while at the same time being committed to dreaming a world that is not yet. Right. And so its task, right, the task of the people involved is to, make time and space to, question and trouble the things that have been taken for granted, then envision, right, a society in which those things were altered in such a way that it could preserve people's lives and make it more possible for people to strive, and then build a bridge from here to there, right? And this is a task that they understand to be multi-generational, right? Which is another thing, right? So, in the end, this was the justification that people had to make inside the movement for engaging in electoral politics, which was not universally popular, right? It was
Fair
not
enough.
universally. And so, the argument that people had to eventually sort of end up making, and that the sort of authors of this notion of electoral justice made, was that, like, elections are not going to solve our problems. Elections are not going to transform the world on their own, but elections serve some important functions for movement itself, not only in terms of harm reduction, which we can kind of all sort of see and agree with, although we can debate the degrees, right, of harm that we're actually sort of reducing, but also it serves as a gauge for how deeply our vision is penetrating into the public as a whole, right? It serves, it helps us to understand where people are, right? Because we're organizing, but then also it helps us to understand how receptive people are to, the ways that we make sense of the world as it is, our propositions for how to change the world, our policies that we're actually right? Like, so it serves as a check for us as movement in terms of how our organizing is going. And ultimately, that was the argument that won the day.